Picture hundreds of heavily armed Nazi soldiers fleeing a fortified town in absolute terror, convinced an entire Allied regiment is surrounding them. The truth? That regiment was just one French-Canadian sniper, and he only had one eye. This isn't a superhero movie. It's the greatest psychological warfare manipulation of World War II.
Do you want to know how the impossible happened? Welcome to the true story of Léo Major and the liberation of Zwolle, Netherlands in April 1945. Based on official Canadian military field reports and the harrowing accounts of the Dutch resistance, we are going to break down exactly how one man achieved this. In the next few minutes, we will dissect the brutal sensory overload tactics Léo Major used to completely shatter the fighting spirit of the German garrison, turning their entrenched confidence into sheer, unadulterated panic in a single night.
The misconception and the maverick. When we visualize the liberation of a major European city in World War II, our minds instantly conjure up scenes of apocalyptic destruction. We picture columns of Sherman tanks grinding their treads over cobblestone streets. We hear the deafening roar of heavy artillery turning ancient buildings into rubble. We imagine thousands of infantrymen kicking down doors, engaging in brutal, bloody, room-to-room combat. The conventional military doctrine of 1945 dictated that to dislodge a dug-in Nazi force from a fortified town of 50,000 people, you needed overwhelming, catastrophic firepower. You needed a giant hammer. In mid-April 1945, the Canadian Army found themselves staring down that exact scenario just outside the beautiful, historic Dutch municipality of Zwolle. The town was a fortress. It was heavily garrisoned by hundreds of German soldiers, equipped with machine gun nests, armored vehicles, and fortified bunkers. The Canadian High Command looked at the tactical map and made the cold, calculated decision of war. To break the German lines, they ordered a devastating, concentrated artillery bombardment scheduled to commence at dawn. But there was a horrifying reality attached to this order. Zwolle was not an empty, evacuated battleground. 50,000 Dutch civilians were hiding in their cellars, terrified and praying for salvation. A full-scale Allied artillery barrage wouldn't just root out the Nazis, it would completely obliterate the town. It would slaughter thousands of the very men, women, and children the Canadian soldiers had crossed an ocean to save. To destroy the enemy, they would have to destroy the city. Unwilling to massacre civilians without trying any other option, the Canadian commanding officer offered a desperate alternative. Before bringing the hammer down, he asked for 2 volunteers to slip into the town under the cover of darkness. Their mission was not to fight. It was a suicide mission, simply to scout the German positions, assess the enemy's strength, and try to make contact with the local Dutch resistance. If they failed, or if they didn't return by morning, the artillery would fire. Enter Private Léo Major. To comprehend the sheer insanity of what is about to happen, you must first understand the psychology of this specific soldier. Léo Major was not a clean-cut, rule-following infantryman. He was an absolute maverick, a rebellious, stubborn, and incredibly lethal lone wolf. By all medical and military regulations, Léo shouldn't have even been on the European continent. Months earlier, during the brutal fighting following the D-Day landings in Normandy, Léo had single-handedly engaged an elite SS patrol. In the ensuing firefight, a German phosphorus grenade exploded right next to his face. The searing, burning chemicals permanently blinded his left eye. He was hospitalized, declared unfit for combat duty, and handed a medical discharge ticket straight back to Canada with a full pension. For most men, a lost eye is a one-way ticket to safety. For Léo Major, it was an insult. He ripped up the discharge papers. He refused to be sent home.
He looked his commanding officer in the eye and stated with absolute terrifying conviction that he only needed his right eye to look through the scope of a sniper rifle. He argued that he looked perfectly fine to shoot Nazis. This is the man stepping into the dark. Now, shift your perspective and step inside the minds of the German soldiers occupying Zwolle on that cold April night. The garrison is deeply entrenched. For these soldiers, the thick stone walls and layered defenses provide a profound psychological blanket of security. They know the Canadian Army is camped miles away. They know that if a full regiment tries to assault the city, their forward sentries will spot them, alarms will sound, and the attackers will be slaughtered in the open streets. The German officers are drinking in the local taverns they've commandeered. The enlisted men are resting in their barracks, their weapons leaning against the walls. They are suffering from the ultimate tactical vulnerability, overconfidence. They believe that darkness is their shield. They are operating under the absolute certainty that no enemy force could penetrate their defenses without triggering a massive battle. The psychology of the German defenders is one of arrogant invincibility. They are completely oblivious to the fact that the darkness is about to become their graveyard. They do not know that a one-eyed phantom is already slipping past their perimeter, armed with a submachine gun, a bag full of grenades, and a deeply terrifying plan to tear their minds apart.
The night of chaos and psychological collapse. Midnight. The medieval streets of Zwolle are dead silent, shrouded in an impenetrable, suffocating darkness. The German garrison is asleep, secure behind their fortifications. Then, a sudden, blinding flash. A fragmentation grenade shatters the stillness, detonating with a concussive roar that rattles the glass in the windows. Before the ringing in the Germans' ears can even begin to fade, the sharp, distinctive rat-tat-tat of a Canadian Sten submachine gun echoes violently down a narrow cobblestone alleyway. The infiltration has begun. But Léo Major is not fighting a conventional infantry battle. He is engineering a masterpiece of psychological terror. He knows that one man cannot shoot his way through hundreds of entrenched soldiers. To win, he does not need to kill every Nazi in Zwolle. He only needs to make them believe they are already dead. His primary weapon is not the ammunition in his pouches, it is sensory overload. In the confined, labyrinthine environment of an old European city, urban combat physics becomes a weapon. Sound behaves like rushing water. It bounces off heavy stone walls, funnels down tight corridors, and multiplies exponentially. Léo weaponizes this acoustic nightmare to create the ultimate tactical illusion, the phantom regiment. He moves with the speed and ferocity of a hunted animal. He sprints from block to block, a solitary one-eyed shadow draped in the pitch black. He throws a grenade into a German guard post on the eastern side of a street, instantly pivoting to sprint 50 yards to the west, where he unloads a full 32-round magazine from his submachine gun into the sky or through an empty window. Then he runs again. He kicks over metal trash cans, fires captured German weapons to change the acoustic signature of the gunfire, and screams orders into the empty night in both French and English. To a German soldier jolted awake in a cold sweat, this does not sound like one rogue scout. The overlapping explosions, the varying calibers of gunfire echoing from 4 different compass points, the chaotic shouting, it sounds exactly like an entire Allied infantry battalion has already breached the perimeter and is methodically swarming the city. The initial psychological phase for the German defenders is profound, paralyzing confusion. Their entire defensive doctrine relies on a directional threat, an enemy attacking from the outside in, but the threat is coming from everywhere at once. They cannot pinpoint the axis of advance. Their officers are screaming into radios, demanding situation reports, but no one knows where the front line is, because the front line is a single man sprinting in circles. Their absolute confidence evaporates in seconds, replaced with the terrifying realization that they have been completely bypassed and surrounded. Adding to the paralyzing terror is the sudden, inexplicable disappearance of their own men. As Léo moves like a ghost through the winding streets, he stumbles upon German patrols sent out to investigate the noise. Instead of engaging in protracted firefights that would reveal his singular position, he ambushes them using sheer, unadulterated aggression. He kicks open doors, shoves the barrel of his smoking Sten gun directly into the chests of disoriented sentries, and barks commands with the furious authority of a commanding officer. The shock value is immense. Caught off guard in the dark, deafened by the ambient explosions, and utterly convinced they are surrounded by hundreds of invisible Allied commandos, the German soldiers simply drop their rifles. Léo captures groups of 8, 10, even 12 heavily armed men at a time. He frog marches them out of the immediate combat zone, hands them over to the bewildered but eager members of the local Dutch underground resistance, and then instantly vanishes back into the blackness to strike somewhere else. For the German command structure, this is an escalating nightmare. Patrols are dispatched into the dark, and they simply cease to exist. The radio networks go dead. The silence of the missing men becomes even more terrifying than the explosions. But confusion and missing patrols are not enough to break an army. Léo Major needs the Germans to cross the psychological threshold from paranoid confusion into absolute irrational panic. He needs to magnify their fear and give them a horrifying visual anchor to confirm their worst nightmare. He finds the perfect target, the local Gestapo headquarters. This building is the terrifying nerve center of the Nazi occupation, a symbol of German absolute power in Zwolle. Léo does not just attack it, he systematically annihilates it. He hurls incendiary grenades through the ground floor windows. Within minutes, the massive structure is consumed by a roaring, uncontrollable inferno. Giant pillars of orange flame shoot into the pitch-black sky, raining ash down on the cobblestones and illuminating the rooftops of the town with a hellish glow. This is the tipping point. Fire is a primal, evolutionary trigger for panic. Up until this exact moment, the German soldiers only had the phantom sounds of overlapping gunfire to fuel their paranoia. Now they have catastrophic visual confirmation of a massive, overwhelming assault. In the flickering, violent light of the burning Gestapo headquarters, the shadows of the town dance and twist, making every alleyway look like it is swarming with advancing troops. The German soldiers' own minds betray them. The sensory overload is complete. They look at the towering flames destroying their command center and hallucinate a reality that doesn't exist. They convince themselves that heavy Canadian armor has breached the city gates and a massive invasion force is methodically burning them out, block by block. At this precise moment, the psychology of the German garrison completely fractures. The rigid, highly disciplined command structure of the Wehrmacht disintegrates. Years of military training are instantly overwritten by the most basic, primitive instinct of the human animal: survival. The herd mentality violently kicks in. When the first squad of soldiers breaks rank and runs from the fire, the panic becomes a contagion. It spreads like a virus through the entrenched positions. Junior officers scream for order, waving their pistols, but their voices are entirely drowned out by the roar of the burning buildings, the relentless phantom gunfire echoing through the streets, and the sheer volume of terrified men. No one is in command. The defensive lines collapse inward. The overwhelming fear of being encircled, trapped, and slaughtered in the narrow medieval streets completely overrides their duty to hold the town. The German soldiers scramble frantically for the exits. They abandon their heavy, tripod-mounted machine guns. They leave their armored transport vehicles idling in the streets. They drop their rifles, their ammunition crates, and their supplies. Hundreds of heavily armed, combat-hardened Nazi soldiers begin to trample over each other in the dark.
They pour out of their bunkers and sprint desperately towards the eastern bridge, clawing over one another to escape the phantom regiment. They are fleeing a ghost. A single, one-eyed sniper has completely weaponized their own imaginations against them, turning a fortified military stronghold into a chaotic, desperate stampede of terrified men.
The untold secret and the true motive. How does a single human being sustain that level of adrenaline, aggression, and calculated madness for an entire night? It defies all logic. The human body is biologically designed to seek safety, to actively run toward gunfire, to single-handedly assault heavily fortified positions requires a psychological catalyst so extraordinarily powerful that it completely overrides the natural imperative to survive. The history books often paint Léo Major as a fearless, invincible superhero, a larger-than-life character ripped straight from the pages of a comic book. But that sanitized version strips away the deeply human, devastating tragedy of this story. Léo was not acting out of blind patriotism. He was not trying to win a chest full of medals. His ruthless rampage through the dark streets of Zwolle was fueled by a dark, agonizing cocktail of profound grief and absolute, uncontrollable rage. To understand the monster the German garrison faced that night, we have to rewind the clock just a few hours. When the Canadian commander asked for 2 volunteers to scout the town, Léo Major did not step into the darkness alone. He stepped out alongside his closest comrade, his brother-in-arms, Corporal Arsenault. In the absolute meat grinder of the Western Front, the bond between 2 infantrymen is stronger than blood. Willie and Léo had survived the brutal meat grinder of Normandy. They had bled together in the freezing, flooded mud of the Scheldt estuary. They were completely inseparable. As they approached the outskirts of Zwolle under the cover of the night, the mission was purely reconnaissance. But war is inherently chaotic and relentlessly cruel. Around midnight, a German sentry spotted their movement in the shadows. Without warning, a volley of machine gun fire ripped through the freezing air. Léo hit the dirt and returned fire, neutralizing the threat. But Willie was too slow. Corporal Arsenault was struck. He bled out and died in the freezing mud, right next to his best friend. This is the exact moment the narrative of Zwolle shifts from a standard military reconnaissance operation into a terrifying story of vengeance. When Léo Major looked down at the lifeless body of Arsenault, something inside his mind snapped. The psychological safety valve that keeps a soldier sane completely blew out. The profound sorrow of losing his brother instantly, violently metabolized into a cold, terrifying fury. He was completely alone behind enemy lines. By all standard military operating procedures, the mission was hopelessly compromised. The textbook tactical move was to retreat, report the heavy German presence to the command post, and let the morning artillery barrage vaporize the town from a safe distance. But Léo Major looked at the medieval skyline of Zwolle and made a different calculation. If he called in the artillery, 50,000 innocent Dutch men, women, and children would be slaughtered. The historic town would be reduced to a smoking crater. And crucially, the German soldiers who had just murdered Willie would be granted a quick, impersonal death from miles away. Léo refused to let that happen. He reached down, took Willie's submachine gun, strapped his dead friend's grenades to his own webbing, and made a silent vow in the dirt. He was going to save the city, and he was going to make the entire German garrison pay for Willie's blood, personally. He crossed the psychological threshold from a reconnaissance scout to an apex predator with absolutely nothing left to lose. When you realize that every grenade thrown and every magazine emptied into the night was a scream of grief for a dead friend, the sheer, relentless aggression of his one-man assault suddenly makes perfect, horrifying sense. He fought like a man who was no longer afraid of dying, because a massive part of his soul had just died in the mud outside the city gates.
As dawn finally broke on April 14th, the impossible had been achieved. The artillery barrage was called off. The German army had abandoned their fortress. 50,000 innocent Dutch men, women, and children poured into the streets, crying and cheering, completely unharmed. Zwolle had been liberated without a single Allied artillery shell falling on its homes, and it was all because of a grieving, one-eyed sniper who refused to stop fighting. For this unprecedented act of extreme valor and psychological warfare, the British and Canadian High Command immediately nominated Léo Major for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, or the DCM, one of the absolute highest honors for gallantry in the entire British Empire, second only to the Victoria Cross. This is the part of the story where the hero humbly accepts the accolades, a brass band plays, and a famous general pins the shiny medal to his chest. But Léo Major was not a conventional hero. He was the ultimate ungovernable maverick. When informed that Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the supreme commander of the Allied ground forces, was going to personally present him with the DCM, Léo Major did the unthinkable. He flatly refused to accept it. With staggering audacity, this enlisted private told the military brass that he believed General Montgomery was a grossly incompetent commander whose arrogant strategic blunders cost the lives of far too many good men. Léo coldly stated that any medal handed to him by Montgomery was completely worthless. He turned his back on the highest echelons of the Allied command and walked away. He didn't want a piece of metal. He just wanted his best friend back.
The big picture and the aha moment. When the sun finally rose over Zwolle on the morning of April 14th, the 50,000 Dutch civilians cautiously emerged from their dark cellars. They braced themselves for the deafening, earth-shattering roar of the Canadian artillery barrage that was supposed to level their homes. Instead, they were met with an eerie, beautiful silence. The formidable German garrison, numbering in the hundreds, had completely vanished into the countryside. When the Canadian Infantry Regiment finally rolled their tanks into the city limits, expecting a brutal, block-by-block bloodbath, they were met with a surreal, impossible sight. The town was entirely secure. And sitting quietly inside a local tavern, exhausted and mourning the loss of his best friend, was Private Léo Major, casually drinking a morning beer. He had saved 50,000 lives and captured a heavily fortified city entirely by himself. But the true legacy of Léo Major's impossible victory at Zwolle is the ultimate aha moment of psychological warfare. His one-man siege proves a terrifying universal truth about human conflict. Perception is reality. You do not always need 1,000 men and heavy artillery to defeat a dug-in enemy. If you can hijack their senses, manipulate their environment, and force their minds to hallucinate a hopeless scenario, they will defeat themselves. Léo understood that a soldier's most vulnerable weak point isn't his armor or his bunker, it is his imagination. By weaponizing chaos and overloading their senses, he made the Nazis believe they had already lost. And when the mind surrenders, the body drops its weapon long before you ever have to pull the trigger. Fear, planted deep in the human psyche, will always be far more devastating than the firepower you carry in your hands. Léo Major used sheer, unpredictable madness to manipulate the German mind and force a retreat. But what if I told you there was an entire Allied unit dedicated exclusively to this exact kind of psychological deception? A top-secret battalion made up not of hardened commandos, but of actors, artists, and sound engineers. While Léo used real grenades to create a phantom regiment, this classified unit used inflatable rubber tanks, massive concert loudspeakers, and theatrical illusions to trick entire German panzer divisions.
How did a traveling circus of artists fool Hitler's deadliest generals and save thousands of lives? Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the incredible, unedited true story of WWI's ultimate illusionists, the Ghost Army.